This is the start of a new series of a seminar series at the department. And if you are interested in presenting also, you can come to me and discuss this. So we will start today with kind of a smooth introduction to the discipline by starting with what we have been experimenting locally. So it's about the department. And we have two great speakers who have the experience. So for somebody like me who comes from another country and like another field, actually, it's quite nice to have the chance to hear you today. And maybe like the personal motivation for why I decided to kind of kickstart this seminar series is quite actually linked to this idea that when I was an undergrad student, many of my interesting economic professors were actually in the Department of History, and many of the many of the economic professors were actually interested in history. So that kind of showed a bit of a trend, but also raised a couple of questions of the state of the field and how actually we want to be able to talk about what we are here quite well able to do at the department. So the format will be that there will be 20-minute presentation, starting with Benny, and then after Matt will present. And then we'll have a small discussion. It's a bit of a test today since it's the first time, so we will try to readjust if there are things, but I hope that you will enjoy it. So we can start with Benny's presentation.
Thanks, Clara, for a very good initiative about the history of the discipline and the department and about the history of economic thought more in general. Of course, I'm not one of the oldest guys here, but I got the honor of talking a bit about the old times. We have some people here who are older at the department than I am. And it will be a hell of a lot of name dropping, of course, and to just give you a view of the names that will appear here. It's not so easy always to get the names when you're just talking about it. So I have a list here for you who are present to know. Yeah. Everything in Sweden when it comes to economic history begins with Eddie Hecker. He was, of course, as you probably know, both an economist and an economic historian. And in 1929, after his effort to become the principal at the Stockholm School of Economics, this attempt failed, not because of his scientific standing, which was great, but due to a lack of cooperative skills on his behalf. He got a personal professorship in economic history and wrote this magnum opus about Sweden's economic history. He had the ambition of establishing economic history as an independent discipline in Sweden. However, the historians wanted to retain control over the subject as a sub-discipline. And economists like Gunnar Myrdal and Bertil Ohlin in Stockholm and Johan Åkerman in Lund, they had a rather condescending attitude towards economic history. Åkerman's argument was that economic historians should study pre-industrial societies and economists industrial societies. But finally, in the mid-1940s, some economists began to show interest in economic history. And in 1947, the government put forward a proposition acknowledging economic history as an independent discipline. And three so-called preceptors were something between a docent, that is an associate professor, and a full professor, were established in Lund, Gothenburg, and Uppsala. All three were basically occupied by historians. The one in Lund by Oskar Bjurling in 1948. I'm sorry, but I think nobody ever been able to find a picture of Bjurling, but some remember him at least. Bjurling wrote his doctoral thesis in history, but had before written his licentiate thesis in economics. And then in 1959, these preceptorships were transformed into professorships. Still, when Björling became a preceptor, the idea was that economic history should be connected to history. However, Björling went on his own and established himself in a room at the National Archives in Lund, in Swedish Landsarkivet. And when he became professor in 1959, he moved the department to a villa on Finngatan 16. In 1973, Björling was succeeded by Lennart Jörberg. I have some magnificent technique here. Jörberg was the head and the strong man of the department for many years. And he had studied at Berkeley in the United States and been inspired by the Cliometric Revolution, the new economic history. He received his PhD in 1961. The thesis was called The Growth and Fluctuations in Swedish Industry, 1869 to 1912. And due to his influence, economic history became, to a larger extent than the other economic history departments in Sweden, characterized by the use of neoclassical economic theory and quantitative methods. For many years, the department had a special relationship with cliometrics and neo-institutionalists like Robert Vogel and Douglas North, who shared the Nobel Prize in 1993, when Jörberg was on the Nobel Committee. In this way, economic history in Lund became, as historian Björn Hetman has formulated it, the main heir to the Heckscher way of working. But it's not really that simple, because in a paper on the establishment of economic history as an independent discipline in Sweden, Professor Ole Krantz has come to the following conclusion, I quote: "A methodological thinking which can bring to mind Heckscher's is thus today common within Swedish research in economic history, but paradoxically it does not emanate primarily from Elie Heckscher, but from the United States." Krantz worked with, oh, there we have the guys, I forgot to show them. Krantz here on the left, this is a picture of Olsson and Olsson. The neck is from Ulf Olsson, another professor in economic history. And Krantz worked from the beginning with Carl Axel Nilsson, and later on Lennart Schön and Jonas Ljungberg, who are sitting here and have a good appetite, on national accounts and long-term cycles. And they were inspired by a bunch of economists like Josef Schumpeter, Simon Kuznets, Alexander Gerschenkron, Johan Åkerman, Ingvar Sven Nilsson, and Erik Dahmén. And during the 30 years in the cozy villa at Finngatan, have the villa here, Jonas, the artist, 3 big research groups germinated, which still today are present at the department. Economics of structure, which I've already mentioned now, population and development. Eventually this villa became crowded, as you can see here. And in 1988, the department moved to Holger Crawford's Economy Center, now the School of Economics and Management. I remember we had a discussion before the move, and some attendants feared that the move would bring us away from history and very close to economics. And this is, as far as I understand, exactly what happened, but nobody seemed to bother when it happened. At the time of the move, a generational change was in the making. and a new phase of expansion of the department began. Gunnar Fridlisius, who had been, did I mention him before? Yes. Well, 1976, he was a professor at the department, and when he retired in 1988, the same time as we moved up here, a professorship of modern and social economic history was established, and it was held by Rolf Olsson. Where do we have Rolf? Here he's on the left. Talking to the same Olsson again, who was involved in the transcript. Rolf had this professorship until he died in 2004. And he wrote the first dissertation in Sweden, one of the first dissertations in Sweden, on immigrants in 1975. And then he moved on more to writing about education. And I'm not very familiar really with the sources of inspiration for the population economists here, but names like Gary Becker and Richard Easterlin and Roger Schofield, that's what comes to my mind. Wrigley, okay, Tom Wrigley. So, yeah. In 1992, Jörberg was retired, and he was succeeded by Lennart Schön, who unfortunately died in 2016. And during the 1970s and 80s, a lot of students from Africa, Asia, and Latin America studied at the department and completed their doctoral theses here. And in 1996, a professorship was created and directed towards the so-called Third World and held by Christer Gunnarsson on the right here. He's now emeritus. And Nilo Hapti here, he was a pioneer in this field within the department. And sources of inspiration for this group was names like, of course, as always, Alexander Gerschenkron and Walter Rostov, but more also the different dependency economists. Samir Amin, Paul Baron, André Gunder Frank, Arthur Lewis, Raoul Prebisch, Hans Singer, and Immanuel Wallerstein. After the turn of the millennium, a whole bunch of professors have been appointed and many new fields of research have been opened, and that's what Mats will come into in a couple of minutes. I will just end with a funny story, although I know that conventional wisdom says that you should always start with a funny story if you want to catch the interest or the attention of the audience. I have this story, an example of how education might be handled in the old days. That's the early 1970s, straight from the horse's mouth. This student had read all the courses required for a PhD and was to account for this huge amount of literature at an oral exam. He approached the professor, who, to his surprise, set a time Friday evening. The student appeared very nervous, of course, with all this literature. And the professor had laid the table with cakes and coffee. And the two had a nice chat. And then finally, the professor asked, "Have you read all the books?" "Yes," the student replied. "Fine," the professor said, "you passed the exam." Okay. Just one last slide when I think of it. I was kind of a assistant when I was a PhD student, and you had to do a lot of practical stuff. The worst thing was every time you had a guest lecturer, I had to get him to sign some papers and then go down to the bureaucracy and then go to the bank and get the money. And this took about 2 hours. So I never could listen to these guest lecturers because I had to run around and solve the bureaucratic problem. But this is a list of, there's someone missing up here, I guess, at the top. Björn Olsson, for example. But this is the people who were employed at the department when this is from you see, mid-1980s when I was assistant.
Yeah, thank you so much, and a really nice illustration. We can go with Mats. I can put up your slides.
Yes. There will be my talk will be completely different from Benny's because there will be no name dropping at all. I realized that the closer you come in history to nowadays, the more difficult it is actually to do name droppings because you are in the middle of everything. So I decided to refrain from that part of the story building at all. I will continue more or less where Benny stopped. He talked about a expansion phase during the 1980s, and a third development and expansion phase started actually, I would say, in the middle of the first decade of the 2000s, and that came with two important. First, I would say that the ground for this was a more extensive way of collaborating with other disciplines, mostly within the university. And that gave us actually two very important milestones. The first one is the two Linnaeus grants that the department was heavily involved in 2006, that gave 10-year financing of big research programs within innovation and within economic demography. And the second one is the Bologna process and our part in that, where the department went from having 2, maybe 4 or 5 magister students each year to establishing these master programs with over 100 students enrolled, so to say, and a very international. And I think that was so important for the internationalization of the department. Yes. So we went from, I think at Finngatan, there were around 20 people employed at the department. And in the 1990s, up to 2010, 45, 50, maybe up to 55 at some point in time employed. And now we are around 100. One very important milestone is, of course, this. What, as you saw from Benny's pictures, they were all men. A complete parade of men, and this was the key. It looks like this at the department at 2008. In 2014, it was like this, the number of professors, and now we are at 2021, 6 women and 4 men as professors today, and so things actually have changed in many ways. And the next expansion and renewal phase of the department are we perhaps in the middle of, or maybe we have stabilized in some way at a new level. And it started around the year 2012 with actually a constant inflow of new research grants. And with that came an explosion in the number of postdocs and people employed as researchers. Before that, we normally had 3, 4, or less even people employed as postdocs and such positions. Now we came up with numbers that's 20, 25, up to 30 people employed as postdocs and researchers. And a continuous inflow of these big grants. You heard what I said before. The Linnaeus grants were typical examples of that. But it continues with Svinno, the Landskrona project. We had 2 Wallenberg Academy Fellows, the factory census, the Cape project, one of the latest of these, often with important databases in focus. But just as important as this is, of course, that we invite all our scholars to try their wings with research proposals, and that has led to a broad inflow, so to say. At the same time, we did expand our teaching again with a new bachelor program, with the first bachelor program, and renewal of our master programs. And here is the current status, as you can see here, for 2010, with about 50 people employed, and up to today, maybe stabilized around 100 or something like that. I tried to look at, actually, when Clara asked me for this task, I tried to look a little bit what kind of trends we have in PhD thesis at the department. We have had over the years about 140 dissertations, and as you can see here in the 1970s, we had about 18. It was down to 14 in the 1990s, and then a lift up to in 2010s over 40 theses. As you can see, there were not many women that wrote theses at the department at that point in time, but it has gone better. At that point in time, almost all theses were monographs. As you can see, very few compilations with 4 articles. But today, the majority of the theses are compilation theses. A huge part was written in Swedish, although it early on had an international profile, and that was not not entirely the students that came to us from Africa and Asia. It was also quite a few that wrote their thesis. But nowadays, very few theses are written. Out of 41 in the 2010s, only 2 in Swedish. I also tried to play a little bit with the main methods and interest in the thesis. This is far from ready, this part. It's always hard to look at an old thesis and see how it, but I think it's more or less right. So in the beginning of the department's history, almost all theses were actually built on macro data, trying to create series of national character or such things. But as you can see, increasing interest in micro and using microdata, using more advanced econometrics in that, often, not always, it can also be more qualitative, but there is a clear tendency, I would say, from pure macro to micro, but often, I would say, a combination of interests, so to say. As Benny said, we defined ourselves before in 3 major research areas. Now we define ourselves in 6 major research areas. And I try to analyze how many at the department that are. This is some people define themselves in many, up to 3 actually. It's possible in the system. So you can look at the first choice here, and there you can see 3 more or less equal in size research area, and those 3 in some respect is a continuation of the old 3 areas. But I would say that it's more complicated than this, because now there is a combination of methods and approaches within these, and many of them are defined in quite a few of these. For example, sustainability transformations has gone to be a very strong area of research here, and you can say it has developed in different directions, from more interest in national series, national issues, to maybe more regional. Even here, lots of micro perspectives are involved here. The demographers was of course first with micro approaches, but I would say that they have good company now in almost all of the other spheres. So where do we publish? This is, you can see it on top, but this is journals. And as you can see, the development of number of publications is quite impressive. We have gone from 25 per year to 80 publications in peer-reviewed journals per year. But if we look more in detail where we publish in percentages, we can see some interesting trends. First, that we of course we always want to publish in economic history journals, but this goes up and down between years. You could see that you can see that we are basically back to where we were in 2014 with about 13-15%. A small increase perhaps in history journals, but as you can see, economics journals, they go from a quite low share of the number of publications to maybe just as many as in economic history journals. Social science other, that is growing part of our publication, at least from the mid of the 2010s. The demography is going down a little bit, but they tend to diversify their publications as well. Some published, for example, in social science, others. Medicine, it's always been a small one, but nonetheless important. It's mostly the demographers that co-author, for example, together with people from that have experience in those journals. But here is a strong increase in the number of publications that is in journals attached to sustainable development, energy politics, and policy and such things. And as you can see, pure development journals are going down a little bit. So it's quite interesting to see where we are going in this. And of course, it's always good to compare ourselves with the other departments at Lund, and the impressive red line is economic history. We haven't got the results for 2020 yet, but will eventually come. When we made our, how is I'm in time, Clara?
You maybe have 5 minutes more.
5 minutes, that's good. When we had the evaluation of the department research in the so-called RK20 evaluation process, we were asked to compare ourselves with some benchmarks, and our benchmarks that we decided to go for was the Department of Economic History in Uppsala, the Utrecht Economic and Social History Group, London School of Economic History, the Economic History Department, and ourselves, of course. And here is the total number of publications in journals. As you can see, we when it comes to publications that are in the top ranked journals, we are doing quite well. But when we compare ourselves to, for example, the Economic History Department at the LSE, they are much stronger in the top 4 economic history journals. But on the other hand, the top ranked journal, the top ranked economic history journal, that is the Journal of Economic History, it has an impact factor of 2.12. So we compared how many above that impact factor we had in other journals, and as you can see, we beat the LSE with quite a few points there. And also when it comes to average impact factor, and so much for that. Wait. That was complicated. Nope. Okay. So, so the department was founded in 1949. I would say that we had reached some goals. We have a critical mass for a dynamic and competitive international research environment, and we are still good at attracting external research grants. I would say that is the core of the latest success story, and maybe the whole success story of the department. We focus on relevance in research and teaching. And we have broadened the discipline. We have some kind of low-intensive debate among the professors about this. Is this good for the department or bad for the department, that we are broadening our scope of research? My view has always been that it's good for the department, because I know that there is a core of pure economic history, whatever that is. But the study of economy and society in change, so to say, the core of that is there all the time. And I will end the presentation with something that you already have seen at the kickoff in August about the department's research strategy. And here you can see it really, but the the overarching research strategy of the department is to be open and inclusive. It's anchored in three key concepts, that is relevance, it's internationalization, and building research infrastructure. And with that, I end with a quote from the RQ20 evaluation. The department's leadership has sought to let 1,000 flowers bloom. The result is a very productive, creative, and diverse research portfolio. Period. Thank you.
So thank you so much, both of you, for your presentations. I think that the two themes of this series actually came out quite a lot in both of your presentations. So the main two themes would be to talk about who are some of the economic historians and what is their contribution. And the other one is to talk about the discipline itself, what kind of methodology are used, what kind of pluralism is welcome inside of the discipline. So we will explore these more with the next seminars, but we have some time for questions. We actually have booked the room for a bit longer, but I understand if you need to go. But if there are any questions, it's time for conversation now, and maybe even other perspective on the department can be shared if there are more to add.
I have a question for Mats. So I was just, it's maybe not a very broad question, but I was just focusing on the PhD thesis, and that there was a quite sharp change from, I think, from the year 2000, from when there were many more compilation theses than earlier. And I was wondering if you know, or if you have an explanation for what happened.
Yes, I'm not sure, but I think the younger scholars, when they that came in during the after the year 2000 and certainly
The reform of PhD studies.
Yes, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if that was there was a reform of the PhD student that meant that you basically had 4 years to fulfill to your PhD training. But I mean that the writing monographs continued after that for some time. I think the main explanation is that people wanted to get articles out. They wanted to get papers out. And if you first was to write a monograph and then rewrite them as papers, it will be more time consuming.
Yeah.
And the second one is maybe that we have been getting closer to economics in some sense. I mean, the historians, they rarely or never write compilation thesis. So I think that's the two explanations, actually.
Yep.
But you know, what I've been listening to is interesting because I'm one of the oldest in the department. Time when I did my PhD, it was even before you. No? You were very young guy. I didn't get much of guidance, supervision, you know. And what I find the change here that has happened in the department is so much more structure in the supervisors and the interaction between the supervisors and the PhD candidates and the amount of help you get. in terms of writing your dissertation. Sometimes I wish we had it too. In fact, I don't mind telling you that the example Benny gave in the end of his interesting talk, that's me. I still remember 72, Oscar was retiring and he was supposedly my supervisor, and he had absolutely no inkling of what I wrote about. He knew nothing about it. And then I told Oscar, you're retiring and I have to do my literature course. He said, okay, come. Can you come next Friday? Yes. When? 5 o'clock in the evening? Okay. I go there 5 o'clock, and the whole night I couldn't sleep the previous night. I'm sweating like a fat pig. And his table is all clean there, you know, in that wonderful room, prefect's room, and his beaner bread, kanel bulla, today is kanel bulla, kanel bulla, coffee. So I sat there and I asked him, are you going to test me now? Oh, what's the hurry? Let's enjoy. So we enjoy it, and I'm still nervous. And I asked him, Oscar, please, have you read the books? I think so. I hadn't. I think so. You passed. Good. But that was the type of guidance I got, for heaven's sake. And no, I can't say I got much guidance from Leonard either, because Leonard was totally uninterested in the third world. Europe, you know. He was absolutely zilch interest in third world problems. He said, you're right. So I wrote it, finished the dissertation. I have no idea if it is good or bad. And then I give it to Leonard. And Leonard says, okay, let me have it read by somebody. He sent it to Professor Goldlund. Thank you, God, that it went to Goldlund, who was the international economist, well known. So Goldlund read it. He said, it's a very nice dissertation. I will be happy to be an examiner for that. That's all the help I got. I mean, I'm surprised so much of structure and help you people get now. And I keep thinking back, you know, how the hell did I manage to get my PhD? That's the biggest change I see in terms of structure that has changed, the type of help you get. And of course, qualitatively too, that has an impact on the quality of the dissertations you produce, because you get far greater, far concentrated help now than we ever did. And the department has expanded, for the better or worse, I don't know. But it's become much better in one way, I think, the type of help you get and this end product of yours, you know, they're all, I think it has been, it's nice to see the change for me personally, you know, who's been here for donkey's year.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for very nice presentations and a very interesting background history. For those who haven't met me, my name is Anders and I'm a new researcher in the Swinner project, and I'm not an economic historian. That's not my disciplinary identity. I'm a sociologist of science and I do science and innovation policy. So one of my research topics that I've been working with is exactly this, the dynamics of scientific fields and disciplines. So I think this is super interesting with this sort of self-reflective discussion about what the discipline is. And I actually did my PhD on modern economics and the way that it has stabilized as a discipline, which is very close to what we're doing here. But I would be curious to hear a little bit more about this, as Mats mentioned, the low intense discussion about the pluralism of the department and various research fields on the one hand, and on the other hand, keeping to a core of what economic history is. So I thought maybe if you could get some insights about how these discussions go and about the relations to the other departments in Sweden, also in perspective of what Benny mentioned with moving away from history and more closely to economics.
Would you start, Benny?
Well, I don't know if I have much more to say than that people were worried when we moved up here, and then they weren't worried anymore, as far as I know. I think the having these localities was more important than perhaps the core of what we were doing. So everybody enjoyed it when we came up to these nice premises, and didn't talk much about it anymore, as far as I know.
Well, that's true. The more modern discussion is perhaps more, I mean, when we have quite a few people at the department that are not basically from economic history, as yourself. And what will happen with the department in the long run if we embrace basically everything and place it under the umbrella of economic history. As I said, I have never been worried at all because in all these 6 broadly defined research areas, there are professors and associate professors that have their basic training in economic history, that works with economic history-ish questions. My view is that it could be that if we try to swallow whole fields of research from other departments at Lund University, maybe it could be a problem in the long run. But I see actually no, and I wouldn't dare to make any reference of what other people say in this respect. But there has been some concerns over the years, I can say.
Maybe you could add that.
I have never understood economic history. Sorry.
There's been at these economic history meetings, or will be one soon now, but off and on this question popped up about the identity of the discipline and the different leanings in different departments and so forth. But I know I had some interjection at one of those, and I made a survey here about the department. I don't remember much of what it was about now, but it's so long ago. But I think, you know, this worrying thing about the identity of the discipline, I think you can worry about that if you're going down, but when you're going up and everything is going great, just let it flow.
Great. I like that.
No, but I have never understood what the subject is, frankly. And to me, it reminds of a story from Indian mythology. It is called the heaven of Trishanku. May I say that? Tell you the heaven. It's called Trishanku Swarga. It means the heaven of Trishanku. See, Trishanku was an emperor in ancient days. It's probably most of it is bullshit anyway. And his desire in life was to go to heaven when he was alive. So he performed some kind of rituals, and then the sage who performed the ritual, because of the strength he had, the spiritual strength, he sends him up to heaven. And the gods in the heaven, they say, why are you here? You're not dead yet. And they kick him down to the earth. And the sage gets angry. What is it? I have sent you with all my spiritual powers, and this is what's happening. And so he does one more ritual, and India is full of gods and rituals. So they go up, and the gods get pissed off at him. What the hell are you doing here? You have no business to come here. You're not dead. So they send him down. So he comes down. This was before the space travel, the Americans, remember that. Indians were far ahead, at least according to the present political parties. So what the sage does is he stops him in the middle between the heaven and the earth and creates a heaven for him. So that's called Trishanku. To me, economic history has always been neither here nor there. It is somewhere in between. And that's primarily because it has the ability to absorb other issues, other subjects into its fold. You know? And that's the best thing about economic history. But it is not definable. And I have never understood, why should you define? Take it as it is. And it has this absorption ability, all kinds of it. That's what we see in the department now. It has everything in it. And that's the best thing about the subject, I think. I don't know what others feel, but that's how I have felt about the subject. That's the most positive thing about the subject. You know, I always think of Trishanku when I see economic history.
Okay, so the definition of the subject is that it's a small heaven of our own.
I think so. I think so.
Okay, that's a good definition. But maybe we can, I'm looking for words like the study of economic and society in change, so to say, the change of economic and of economy and society. Isn't that some kind of
Sure.
the heaven that you are looking for?
Yeah, but it is in fact a study. It's the subject encompasses study of economy and society.
Yes. Yes.
It's basically a Marxist definition. A holistic way of looking at economy and society. But my problem is this: people try always to define and conceptualize, define. There are certain things that perhaps are less complicated in life than going about. But I agree with you. It's the study of economy and society, and it includes everything.
In change.
That's what I find positive about economic history, at least in the modern terms, not the classical sense.
Can I follow up on that? Thanks for this, and I totally agree that you probably don't need definitions, at least as long as things go well. And it's my, from being here a very short time, also experience that this description of a very pluralistic, let thousand flowers bloom department seems very, very apt. Do you think this view is the same in the discipline looking at other departments in Sweden and abroad? I mean, this broad, hard to define, absorptive, or is this a certain niche that this department has found, and which makes it different from Uppsala, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and so on?
Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, it used to be different characters of these departments. Today, I don't know really. I mean, they talked about Gothenburg being more of a study of different enterprises, and maybe Uppsala and Stockholm was well, maybe more of the agriculture or whatever it was, and mentality studies in Stockholm and so forth. But I don't know today. I don't have this overview. I don't care about it anymore, really.
But I think I agree completely with Benny. There used to be a more sharp divide between the department in Lund and the other departments, which were more. I think yes, Gothenburg was more business history oriented, and maybe the same goes for huge parts of the other departments with some more history and so on. But I think that we have actually converged to more, and they have actually gone in the same direction as we did some years ago. And I think Benny is right that it started actually with Lennart Jörberg and the orientation, the will to learn new methodologies, cliometric methods and so on. And for some at this department, I know they have been what do you call it in English? Olyckligt förälskade, unhappily in love with modern econometric methods.
Unrequited love.
Yes, they like the methods, but the methods doesn't like them. They don't practice it themselves, but they adore them. So it's not a complete. I mean, all the researchers here use all the latest methods and so on, but there is a clear orientation in that direction, and I think that paved the way for being relevant, being able to expand into new areas, start cooperating with economics and other disciplines, even medicine, and doing lots of new interesting stuff. And I think that's part of the success story as well. So we have a heritage from these old guys, all this parade of old men that Benny showed us, nonetheless.